People always ask me what it felt like to hit rock bottom. I never know how to answer that. Because rock bottom for me didn't feel like falling. It felt like standing completely still while the people who were supposed to love me walked right past. I'm 32. I'm an engineer. I've been paying my parents' mortgage since I was 26. I want you to sit with that for a second before I keep going. My name is Trent. I grew up in a small house in Columbus, Ohio with my parents and my younger brother, Cade. My dad worked at a distribution warehouse until his back gave out when I was 19. My mom had cleaned hotel rooms part-time on and off since I was a kid. We weren't poor the way some people define poor, but money was always the weather in our house. Always there, always a problem, always everyone's first thought in the morning. I got a scholarship to Ohio State. Mechanical engineering. I worked nights at a grocery store during my sophomore and junior years, so I didn't have to ask my parents for anything. I graduated, got hired by a mid-sized industrial firm in Cincinnati, and within 2 years I was making more money than anyone in my family had ever made at my age. And then something happened that I didn't see coming. The calls started. Not every day at first, every few weeks. Dad's truck needed new tires. Mom's dental work wasn't covered by the plan. Cade needed money to cover a gap in rent. Each one was a real thing. Each one was small enough that I said yes. And then the gaps between calls got shorter and the amounts got bigger. And somewhere in there it stopped being help and started being something else. I couldn't name it then. I can name it now. It was the arrangement. Nobody called it that. Nobody sat me down and said, "Trent, you are now the family bank." But that's what happened. Slowly, quietly, the way a room fills with water. By the time you notice, you're already in over your head. By the time I was 29, I was covering my parents' mortgage every month, sending Cade between $400 and $700 whenever he texted, and paying for my mom's car insurance on top of my own. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I made good money. I told myself this is what you do for family. What I didn't tell myself, what I couldn't let myself see, was that nobody ever asked how I was doing. Nobody called to check in. Nobody came to visit. The calls always started with a number. 3 years ago, I adopted my daughter. Her name is Lily. She was 4 years old and she had been in foster care for almost 2 years. I'm not going to tell her whole story here because it's hers to tell someday, but I will tell you this. The day she came home with me was the first day in a long time that I felt like I was building something real. I told my family. I sent pictures. My mom said, "That's a lot of responsibility for a single man." My dad said, "You sure you thought this through?" Kate didn't respond at all. My uncle, my dad's older brother. I called him Uncle Walt. He drove 3 hours from Pittsburgh the weekend after I brought Lily home. He brought a stuffed rabbit and a bag of those little clementines she loved. He sat on the floor of my living room and stacked wooden blocks with her for an hour. He didn't ask me for a single thing. He just came. Uncle Walt had been a retired firefighter for about 5 years by then. Quiet guy. Didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. He pulled me aside before he left that day and said, "You look tired, Trent." I laughed it off. He didn't laugh far. 6 months ago, I had a medical situation. I don't want to over-dramatize it because I'm okay now. But at the time, it was serious. I had been having chest pain for a few weeks that I kept dismissing as stress. One morning, I woke up and the pain was different. Sharper, radiating, and I knew. I drove myself to the ER. Turns out I had a cardiac arrhythmia that had gone undiagnosed. Not immediately life-threatening, but the cardiologist wanted me admitted for monitoring and a procedure within 48 hours. I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked to a monitor, when I called my mom. Lily was with my neighbor, a woman named Peg who had watched her occasionally and adored her. Peg had agreed to keep her for a few hours, but she had her own family coming in that weekend and couldn't do more than a day. I needed someone to come get Lily and stay with her while I was in the hospital. The call with my mom lasted 6 minutes. I told her where I was. I told her what the doctor said. I told her I needed her and my dad to come get Lily, just for 2 or 3 days. She said, "Trent, this weekend is really not good for us." I asked why. She told me that she and my dad had already bought tickets to a casino resort about 3 hours away. My dad's old co-worker had organized the trip. They had a hotel room. They'd been looking forward to it for weeks. I said, "Mom, I'm in the hospital." She said, "You said it's not immediately life-threatening." I said, "I need someone with Lily." She said, "Can't your neighbor keep her a little longer? You know your dad doesn't like to cancel things last minute." I didn't say anything for a moment. She filled the silence. Besides, we're not really set up for a child right now. Our place isn't child-proofed. Lily's at an age where she gets into everything. Lily was 5 years old. She was not at an age where she was dismantling electrical panels. I said okay. I hung up. I called Cade. He said he was in the middle of something. He said he'd try to call back. He never called back. Then I called Uncle Walt. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what was happening. He said, I'm leaving in 20 minutes. Text me Peg's address. He drove 3 hours that night. He took Lily home with him to Pittsburgh. He kept her for 4 days. He took her to a children's museum, bought her a winter coat because the one she had was getting small, and taught her to say her full name and phone number. My parents went to the casino. Here's the part that I keep coming back to. I didn't hear from my mom until Tuesday, 3 days after I was admitted. She texted, hope you're feeling better. Did you find someone for Lily? Not a call. A text. And even then, I told myself maybe she didn't understand how scared I'd been. Maybe she didn't know how to show up. Maybe I was expecting too much. That's what years of rationalizing does to you. It makes you a really talented defense attorney for people who have never once defended you. When I got home from the hospital, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Lily was still in Pittsburgh with Uncle Walt. The house was quiet in a way it almost never was, and I just sat there and I let myself think, the thing I had never let myself think before. They don't actually care about me, not the way I've cared about them. I didn't feel angry right away. I felt something closer to grief. Uncle Walt brought Lily home that Friday. He came inside and we had coffee while Lily reorganized my sock drawer for reasons only a 5-year-old understands. I told him everything, not just the hospital, everything. The monthly payments, the texts from Cade, the years of calls that only ever started with a number. I hadn't planned to tell him all of it. It just came out. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make a face. When I finished, he set his mug down and said, How long have you known Trent? I said, Known what? He said, that it was only going the one direction. I didn't answer. He already knew. He told me something then that I hadn't known. When my dad had his back surgery 8 years ago, before I was making real money, when I was still in my first job, Uncle Walt had offered to help my parents with expenses. My dad had turned him down, not because they didn't need the money, but because, according to Uncle Walt, my dad had said, Trent will figure it out. That's what he does. I was 24 years old when my father said that. I had been working for 8 months. That was when I understood. I wasn't the safety net because I was the most capable. I was the safety net because they had decided, early and without asking me, that that was my role. I stopped the payments at the end of that month. I didn't do it with a speech. I didn't send a long text. I logged into the automatic transfer I had set up for my parents' mortgage and I canceled it. I texted Cade and told him I was not going to be able to send money going forward. He responded with a question mark. I did not respond to the question mark. I did not respond to the question mark. My mom called me 3 days before the mortgage was due. She asked if there had been a problem with the transfer. I said no, I canceled it. Silence. Then, Trent, what are you talking about? I said. I can't keep doing this, Mom. She said, what does that mean, you can't keep doing this? We depend on that. I said, I know, but I was in the hospital 6 weeks ago and you went to a casino. She said, that's not fair, Trent. You said it wasn't life-threatening. I said it wasn't life-threatening. I said I needed help with my daughter. That's it. I needed one thing. She started to say something about how they had already paid for the hotel room and how you can't get refunds after a certain point, and I stopped listening. Not out of cruelty. I just understood, maybe for the first time with complete clarity, that she was never going to say the thing I needed her to say. She wasn't capable of it, or she wasn't willing to, I don't know which, and I've stopped trying to figure out the difference. I said, I love you, Mom. I'm going to go now. I hung up. The next few weeks were ugly. My dad called twice. The second call, he raised his voice. He said I was abandoning my family. He said I had a responsibility. He said that if my grandfather were alive, he would be ashamed of me. I almost broke. I want to be honest about that. I almost called back and said I'd reconsider. That's how deep it goes. Decades of being told what your role is, and you feel guilty for stepping out of it, even when stepping out of it is the only sane thing to do. But I didn't call back. Cade texted 3 times over the following 2 weeks. The first text was angry. The second one was guilt trip adjacent. Something about how he didn't know what he was going to do now. The third one, I'll give him credit, was almost honest. He said, I know I've taken advantage. I just didn't think you'd ever stop. I read that text 5 times. I just didn't think you'd ever stop. Not I'm sorry. Not you deserved better. Just the plain admission that they had counted on the fact that I wouldn't draw a line. I didn't respond. Uncle Walt called me about a month after everything unraveled. He'd been talking to my dad, and he wanted me to know what was being said, not to make me defensive, but because he thought I deserved to know. My parents had told the extended family that I was going through something, that I was not myself, that the stress of single parenthood had made me erratic, that they were giving me space while I figured myself out. I was the problem. Of course, Uncle Walt said, I want you to come to Thanksgiving this year. Bring Lily. I've already told your dad you're coming to my place, not theirs. I said, Walt, I don't want to cause trouble. He said, you're not causing anything. I'm hosting. It's my house. I get to decide who comes. Then he said something I think about more than almost anything else anyone has ever said to me. He said, Trent, you have been the most responsible person in this family since you were 24 years old. You have never once been taken care of. It is not your fault that you eventually got tired. I didn't say anything for a second. He said, you still there? I said yes. He said, good. Bring that little girl. She needs to see what family is actually supposed to look like. Thanksgiving was the reckoning. My parents showed up at Uncle Walt's house. I don't know if they expected me not to be there, or if they thought the family setting would prevent any real conversation, but when they walked into the kitchen and saw me standing there with Lily on my hip, my mom's face did something complicated that I didn't have a word for. My dad looked at Uncle Walt. Uncle Walt said, let me get you some coffee. After dinner, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, under a blanket with a football game playing low in the background, Uncle Walt asked everyone to sit. He wasn't dramatic about it. He wasn't angry. He just sat at the head of that table like the former firefighter he was. Calm, clear, not looking for a fight but not running from one either. And he laid it out. He told them what I had told him. He told them what I had told him. He told them about the monthly mortgage payments that had been running for 6 years. He told them about the hospital, about the call, about the casino trip. He told them what my dad had said when he was 24. Trent will figure it out. That's what he does. Then he pulled out his phone. He read the text from Cade. I just didn't think you'd ever stop. My mom opened her mouth to say something. Uncle Walt held up one hand. Not aggressive, just wait. He said, I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone. I'm doing this because someone needs to say it out loud, and apparently nobody else was going to. My dad said I was making him look bad in front of his own family. Uncle Walt said, nobody here is making you look any way but the way you actually are. Your son was alone in a hospital and you chose a hotel room. The silence after that was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My mom cried. I believe the crying was real. I also believe it was for herself more than for me, and I've learned to hold both of those things at once without letting the second one cancel out the first. My dad didn't cry. He sat very still and looked at the table. I watched him do the thing men like him sometimes do when they realize they've gone too far to claim they didn't go anywhere at all. That specific shutdown, that retreat into dignified silence that is not dignity at all. He didn't apologize that night. He hasn't apologized since. My mom called me a week later and said she was sorry that I felt hurt. That particular construction of apology, sorry that you feel, rather than sorry that I did, is something I've learned to recognize. I told her I appreciated her calling. I meant it. It just didn't change anything. Lily turned 6 last month. Uncle Walt drove in for the party. It was small. Peg and her daughter, a couple of kids from Lily's kindergarten class, Uncle Walt, and me. We had a butterfly cake because that's what she wanted. She wore a purple dress she had picked out herself, and she ran around the backyard until she was exhausted and happy. Uncle Walt sat next to me at the picnic table and watched her run. He said, she's doing great, you know. I said, I know. He said, so are you. I didn't argue with that. I used to argue with things like that. I used to deflect compliments the same way I had learned to absorb all the impossible obligations, quietly, automatically, without examining whether any of it was fair or true. I don't do that anymore. I send my parents a short text on birthdays and major holidays. I have not resumed the transfers. My dad and I are not close. My mom and I exist in a careful, limited, not unkind distance. Kate and I haven't spoken since that last text. Maybe that changes someday. Maybe it doesn't. What I know is this. I have a daughter who knows she is the most important person in my life. I have an uncle who showed up at 11 o'clock at night and drove 3 hours without being asked twice. I have a house that is mine, a job I'm good at, and for the first time in about 8 years, I have a savings account that is actually growing. That is not nothing. That is actually everything. People ask me if I regret cutting them off. I always say the same thing. I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped extending myself past the point where I disappeared. There's a difference. It took me a long time to see it. The worst part was never the money. The worst part was realizing how long I had been invisible to the people who were supposed to see me clearest. But I'm not invisible anymore. And that's the only story I want to be telling from here on out. I used to think the hardest part of growing up was figuring out who you were. I know better now. The hardest part is figuring out who the people around you actually are, and then deciding what to do with that information. What happened to me didn't happen overnight. It builds up the way debt does when you're not watching. Slowly, quietly, and then all at once, impossible to ignore. For years, I told myself I was helping. That's what you do for people you love. You show up, you pay the bill, you absorb the inconvenience, and you call it family. But there's a version of helping that isn't really helping at all. It's just a long, slow erasure of yourself. And I erased myself for a long time before I understood what I was doing. The moment I stopped was not dramatic. I didn't flip a table. I didn't write a long letter. I sat in a quiet house up to 4 days in a hospital where not one member of my immediate family came to check on me, and I just stopped lying to myself. That's it. That was the whole thing. The action. Canceling the transfer, not answering the question mark from Cade. That was easy once the lie was gone. What took courage was sitting with what came after. The guilt. The calls. My dad's voice saying I was abandoning them. The part of me that had been trained since I was 24 to believe that keeping them comfortable was the same thing as being a good son. Unlearning that took longer than I expected, and it was not clean or linear. Some days I was certain I'd done the right thing. Other days I woke up at 3 in the morning and just lay there wondering if I was the problem all along. Uncle Walt is the reason I came through that period without breaking. Not because he told me what to do, but because he showed me what it looked like when someone actually chose you. He didn't drive 3 hours because he was obligated to. He drove 3 hours because that is what you do when you love someone. He taught Lily her phone number. He bought her a coat. He sat at a Thanksgiving table and said the thing nobody else was willing to say, not to win an argument, but because he believed I deserved to have the truth spoken out loud by someone who wasn't me. That's what I've come to understand about the way choices accumulate over time. My parents made small choices over and over that always prioritized their comfort over my well-being. Each one seemed minor. Taken together, they built a pattern that told me exactly where I stood. And I made small choices too, to keep paying, to keep rationalizing, to keep accepting less. And those choices built their own pattern. Neither set of choices was invisible. We were all just pretending not to see them. The thing about stopping is that it costs you something real. I lost a version of my family. I lost the story I used to tell myself about who we were to each other. That's not nothing. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. But Lily turned 6 last month with a butterfly cake and a purple dress and a backyard full of people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they had to. And Uncle Walt sat next to me at that picnic table and said I was doing great, and I didn't argue with him. I just believed it. That's the whole lesson, if there is one. Not a philosophy, not a system, just this. The people show up when it costs them something. Those are the ones worth building your life around. And you are allowed to stop funding the people who only appear when there's something in it for them. That's not cruelty. That's just finally having enough self-respect to treat yourself the way you've always treated everyone else.